Virgin rancher, gave his jacket to a cold native. Next day, 200 warriors lined up at his fence. The wind moved slow that morning, not wild, just steady, brushing across the open Wyoming plains like fingers through tall grass. Frost clung to the fence posts, silvered and still. A sky stretched wide above like an old bruise, grey and low. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the smell of it haunted the air, riding on the backs of crows flying south. Isaac Boone stood alone near the barn, boots half buried in mud and frozen gravel. 32 years old and still a virgin in every way that mattered, not just of the flesh, but of touch, of belonging, of ever having been chosen. He had cows to feed and salt blocks to replace, but he hadn't moved in minutes, just stood there, staring at the horizon where the land fell off into nothing. Behind him, the old ranch house leaned like it was tired. No wife ever laughed in its kitchen. No child had ever left muddy prints by the door. Just him, a man built of silence and routine. Then he saw her. At first, just a shape, small, hunched, motionless at the far edge of his pasture, near the barbed wire fence, not moving. A deer, maybe. But as he walked closer, he saw moccasins, bare ankles, a blue dress not made for this wind. Long black hair tangled across her face like thread pulled loose. She didn't cry. She didn't ask. She just shivered. Isaac took off his canvas coat, thick, patched, the only one he owned, and laid it over her shoulders without a word. She didn't flinch, just blinked, slow, as if even blinking took effort now. Her skin was pale, not from blood, but from cold, from hunger. She looked no older than 17. Isaac crouched beside her, didn't ask questions, didn't touch her hands, just waited. Waited like the land waits for spring. Quiet, patient, not expecting much. "You hungry?" he finally said. She looked past him, over his shoulder, as if expecting someone else to speak. But no one came. Only the wind. He stood again and nodded toward the barn. "It's warmer in there." She didn't move, so he walked away slow, coatless now, arms chilled to the bone. Left her to decide. 5 minutes later, the creak of the barn door let him know she'd followed. She still hadn't said a word, but she wore his coat. And somehow, that meant something. Something real. Something that was about to change everything. She sat near the hay bales, legs tucked beneath her like a wounded animal, Isaac's coat swallowing her frame. Her hands were raw. One knuckle was split, like she'd punched something harder than herself. She hadn't said a single word in hours. Isaac fed the animals without looking at her directly, trying not to spook whatever part of her had barely agreed to survive. The barn was warm enough for breath to hang in the air, but not enough to feel safe. He left a tin mug of coffee near her, watched from the corner of his eye as her fingers trembled around it. No thanks. No sip. Just held it like a child clutching a stone. He kept waiting for the question to come. "Who are you? What happened?" But he didn't ask. He didn't need to. He could smell it in her silence. A kind of violence that didn't leave bruises but carved hollows in the soul. That smell. He'd known it once. Long ago, when he was 11 and his father came home drunk after losing the wheat money to cards. His mother had whispered, "Go out back," and Isaac had obeyed. But he'd heard everything. The crash, the begging, the slap, the quiet after. He'd stood behind the shed all night, too afraid to cry, too afraid not to. Looking at the girl now, knees drawn up, jaw set like stone, he saw that same night in her, that same silence. He walked outside and leaned against the barn wall, lit a cigarette with hands that didn't stop shaking. The wind bit his skin through the flannel. He looked out across his land, brittle, endless, untouched. He had lived here his whole life, and still it hadn't touched him. He hadn't let it. He told himself, "She's not your problem." She wasn't. She was native. He was not. She was young. He was not. She was trouble. And he avoided trouble like he avoided mirrors. Isaac ran a hand down his face, calloused palm dragging against the beard he hadn't trimmed in weeks. There were 100 ways this could go wrong. What if someone came looking? What if she accused him of something? What if she never spoke again? He thought of the headlines, of the law, of the girl in his barn who wouldn't meet his eyes. Then he thought of his mother's voice. "Protect what's breakable, Isaac, even if it breaks you back." He stepped back into the barn. She hadn't moved. He cleared his throat, Voice soft. There's a cot in the shed. I'll bring it in here. No response. I won't ask your name. Not till you want me to. Still nothing. But it's gonna freeze hard tonight. I'll bring extra blankets. You'll be all right here. A flicker. Her head tilted slightly, like she'd heard music no one else could hear. Isaac nodded once to himself. The decision had been made long before he said the words. Maybe the moment he laid that coat on her shoulders. Maybe even before that. He turned, stepped into the cold, and began dragging the cot toward the barn. Behind him, a whisper, so soft it barely existed. Thank you. He didn't turn around. He just walked slower, as if he could hold the sound a little longer. The next morning, Isaac found the girl sweeping the barn floor with a willow branch. Still hadn't said her name, still wore his coat like it was armor, but she moved differently, shoulders a bit straighter, chin no longer tucked like a frightened foal. Isaac handed her a biscuit and sat down on an overturned bucket. You got people? He asked softly. A long silence, then, not anymore. He waited. They sold me, she said, to men from the oil camps. She said it like she was reciting a grocery list. No tremble, no pause, just a plain fact, as if it wasn't her body they'd priced. Isaac swallowed hard. You ran, she nodded. Cut the old man's face with his own knife. Took off when they were drunk. That explained the blood crusted on her knuckles, the limp, the bruises beneath her hairline. Will they come looking? She met his eyes for the first time. They always come looking. Isaac didn't say a word, just stood and walked toward the barn door, where the snow had begun to fall. He hadn't touched a gun since the day he nearly shot his father. But now, he opened the trunk in the shed and pulled out his grandfather's Winchester, cleaned it, oiled it, loaded 5 shells. By noon, tire tracks sliced through the frozen gravel near the edge of his land. Not fresh, not old, wide, heavy, diesel truck kind of wide. Isaac hadn't had visitors in months. That evening, as he brought in water from the pump, he saw movement near the tree line. 2 men, cigarettes glowing, watching. They didn't step forward, didn't speak, just watched. That night, Isaac couldn't sleep. He sat by the window with the rifle across his lap. The girl curled on the cot behind him. Every time the wind rattled the panes, his thumb brushed the trigger guard. The next morning, she placed her hand lightly on his arm. They wear white shells around their necks, she whispered. That's how you know. Men who deal girls to the camps. They trade in those. Isaac blinked. You mean teeth? She shook her head. Cowrie shells. Means they belong to the ring. That's when the full shape of it formed in his mind. This wasn't just a crime of lust or cruelty. It was a system. Old, hidden, well-fed. The kind that reached through reservations and used poverty like a bridle. He looked at her again, and saw not a girl, but a witness, a target. And now, because he gave her shelter, so was he. By nightfall, the tire tracks returned, closer this time, ending just 100 yards from his fence. The men didn't step out, just left a gift dangling on the gate, a necklace of white shells, blood-specked. Isaac stared at it for a long time. Then he pulled the girl close and whispered, We don't run. Not anymore. She didn't flinch, didn't tremble. She just nodded once, and for the first time he realized she wasn't the only one being hunted. He was too, not by men, but by the past. They didn't speak much after the shells appeared. Instead, they worked. Morning brought chores, firewood to split, horses to feed, water to boil. Isaac gave her space but kept her close, let her learn the rhythm of the land, the rhythm of him. One afternoon, she found him sharpening a skinning knife on the porch. He didn't look up as she approached, just slid the stone in slow circles. She held out a small rabbit, freshly caught. I watched how the snare works, she said. He nodded. Together they cleaned it. Quiet, careful. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was chosen, like 2 people building a language without needing words. Later he handed her the Winchester. She hesitated. He didn't force it, just waited. Eventually she took it. He showed her how to hold it steady, how to breathe before squeezing the trigger. She missed every shot at first, cursed under her breath in Lakota. Isaac chuckled once. The sound dry, unfamiliar, like an old well suddenly spilling water. Pull through, he said gently. Don't jerk it. Let the shot surprise you. She looked at him. Like trust? He met her eyes. Exactly like that. The next shot hit the can dead center. They didn't celebrate. Just stood in the snow, breath visible between them, the sky bruising toward dusk. Inside the barn that night, she rubbed balm over a burn scar on his forearm. A deep, angry welt, shaped like a horseshoe. He winced. Stove accident. She didn't believe it. He could see that in her eyes. But she didn't press. She placed the balm back in the crate and rolled up her sleeve. There, near her shoulder blade, was a brand. Faint, but deliberate. Not from fire, but from something worse. Mine was a gift, she said flatly, to prove I'd been paid for. Isaac looked away. Not because he couldn't bear it, but because he didn't want her to see the tears. She moved closer, sat beside him on the hay. Their shoulders touched. He spoke without looking. I could have left my father dead in that creek. He begged for help, but I stood there, watched him drown. A long silence followed. She didn't say, "You were a boy." She didn't say, "You were scared." She just reached for his hand and held it, like it was okay to be broken, as long as you didn't let it rot. Snow fell soft outside. The wind didn't whistle anymore. It whispered. That night they didn't sleep much, just sat near the stove sharing one blanket, her head on his shoulder. No kisses, no promises, just warmth and stillness, and two souls that had stopped running, if only for a moment. In that moment, Isaac knew he'd die for her, not because she needed saving, but because in some small, impossible way, she'd already saved him. They came just after sunrise. 2 trucks, thick-tired and dust-crusted, growling up the ranch road like wolves who knew the scent of blood. Isaac had been waiting. The girl stood in the loft, high above the barn, hidden behind hay bales with a loaded rifle and a hammering heart. He'd taught her how to breathe slow, how to count steps, how to survive. But now, it was his turn. 3 men stepped out. One was tall and lean, a silver tooth catching the light when he smiled. Another was wide across the shoulders, with tattoos creeping up his neck like vines. The third, older, wore a sheepskin coat and a necklace of white shells. Isaac walked out alone, shotgun in hand, but not raised. His breath fogged the air. His voice was steady. "She's not here," he said. The tall man laughed. "That's cute." "We saw the coat," the older one said. "You gave her yours. That's called harboring. She's a child. She's property." The words lit something deep in Isaac's chest. Not rage exactly. Something quieter, sharper. A clean kind of fury that didn't rise, just settled, like snow on a grave. "She's not going anywhere with you." The men spread out, flanking him, not rushing, confident. "She cut one of our men," the big one growled. "He'll need stitches and a new cheekbone." "She's got spirit," the silver-toothed man chuckled. "But we break that kind fast." Isaac raised the shotgun, just enough to be noticed. "You'll leave now." "Or what? Or you won't leave at all." A long silence. Then, a rustle. Not from the men. From behind the barn. The men turned, startled, and what they saw made their mouths go dry. A line of horses, silent riders. Men with long braids, painted faces, rifles resting across their laps like sleeping snakes. Warriors. Not boys, not drunks, not relics. 200 strong. The girl had slipped out the night before. Isaac hadn't noticed. She hadn't run. She'd returned, with her tribe. The silver-toothed man took a step back. "What the hell is this?" The old man's mouth went dry. "We didn't know she was—" The girl stepped out from the barn, her face calm, her voice firm. "My uncle is the chief now." She turned to Isaac. "I told them what you did." Isaac said nothing, just kept the gun leveled. The older man dropped his keys. The other 2 followed, hands raised slightly. No one fired a shot, but the message was clear. The trade had ended. The silence had cracked, and the land, once quiet, had remembered its teeth. The men backed away, stumbled into their trucks and drove off without looking back. Isaac exhaled slow. His arms shook. His knees almost buckled, but the girl walked to him, steady as sunrise. "I told them you gave me your coat," she said softly. "Not to warm me," she paused, "but to make me visible again." Isaac looked at her, eyes wet, and for the first time, in all the years he'd lived, He felt chosen. The trucks vanished into the tree line, engines fading like distant thunder swallowed by forest. The silence that followed was unnatural, not peaceful, not safe, just still. The kind of stillness that came after blood was spared, but something inside had still died. Isaac lowered the shotgun. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't drop it. He just stared at the spot where the necklace had hung on his fence, where the shells still swayed, clicking softly in the morning breeze like wind chimes from some cruel altar. The girl stood beside him. She said nothing. Neither did the warriors. They didn't cheer, didn't speak. They simply turned their horses one by one and began to ride. Slow, ghost-like, as if they had only ever existed for this moment. And now, the moment had passed. Her uncle, a tall man with eyes carved from grief, paused near the barn. He met Isaac's gaze, nodded once, a gesture without thanks, without apology, but full of weight. Then, he followed the others into the snow. Isaac and the girl were alone again. Only now, the land didn't feel so empty. Inside the barn, they sat by the stove. The fire cracked softly, casting orange light on the wooden walls. Isaac poured water into a dented kettle, his movements quiet and slow. She held his coat in her lap. Her fingers traced the seams. "You kept it patched," she said softly. He nodded. "I thought one day I'd need it." Her eyes lifted to his. "And you did." The tea steeped in silence. He didn't ask if she was leaving. She didn't say if she'd stay. The barn had no clocks, and neither of them wanted time to move. Later, Isaac walked out to the fence. The necklace still hung there. He took it down. The shells were cracked, stained, but light. So light it hurt. He walked to the riverbed and tossed it into the current, watched it spin, caught between mud and water, until it vanished. Behind him, she stood barefoot in the snow, watching, always watching. When she returned to the barn, she packed what little she had, a braid of dried herbs, a pouch of flint, a folded note she didn't let him see. Isaac didn't ask where she was going. She came to him before dawn, her eyes tired but clear. "I'm going back to help the others," she said. "There are more girls, still caught." He nodded. His throat closed too tight to speak. She slipped his coat over his shoulders again. "You'll freeze without this." He tried to protest. She shook her head. "You've already given enough." A soft breath between them. Then she turned, walked out into the blue light of morning, and was gone. He didn't follow, didn't call out. He just stood at the door, bare feet on frozen earth, steam rising from the tea he'd never drink. And in that silence, he felt something inside him. Not break, not bleed, but open, like land after a long winter. Spring came late that year. The snow didn't melt so much as fade, giving way to mud, to green shoots that curled up from the thawing earth like shy things learning to breathe again. Isaac never spoke much about what happened. Not to the town boys who came by for feed, not to the mailman who noticed the gate had been repaired, nor to the preacher who quietly dropped off blankets that winter. He simply lived. Mornings were for mending, afternoons for tending to calves, nights, quiet. But something had changed. He wrote now. Not letters, not journals, just small notes, folded pieces of paper, tucked under fence posts, inside barn walls, into the pockets of coats he donated to the shelter 3 towns over. Each one held a sentence, never signed. "You're not invisible. No one owns your silence. You are not what was done to you." Some found their way into the hands that needed them. Some likely blew off into the wind. It didn't matter. He still walked down to the river every month and tossed in something small, a cracked button, a strand of hair, once even a single cowrie shell he'd kept without knowing why. One morning, just before the first frost of autumn, he found something on his porch, a bundle of dried sage, a feather, and a folded paper. Inside only one sentence. "I made them look her in the eyes." No name, no sign. But Isaac stood holding that note for a long time. Then, with slow hands, he opened his coat, that same old patched one, now worn thin at the elbows, and placed the paper inside the lining, close to the heart. That evening, he set one more place at his dinner table. Didn't say a word. Didn't expect company. But the plate sat there, warm, as the sun bled out behind the hills, and a wind rose through the cracks in the windows. And somewhere far away, maybe across the plains or deep inside a city alley. A girl with calloused hands and fire in her blood might have paused in her step, felt it, the echo of something that once saved her, something as simple as a man giving away his only coat because he couldn't bear to let her freeze unseen. And in that silence, two lives kept moving, not untouched, but undefeated.